Hi, everybody. This is Kevin O'Reilly, and after some gentle persuasion by Liam Ferry, I agreed to support the DEC Museum project by acting as one of the interviewers of some of the key people who made a profound difference to digital in Galway down through the years. And in that regard, it's my pleasure to speak to Charlie Mulligan about his time with the company, the impact it had on his career and his life in general. So you're welcome, Charlie. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you, Kevin. And I welcome too the opportunity to share my time with digital and sort of the significant experience and the effect that it had both in my personal life and my future career.
Good. Very good. So maybe, Charlie, what we'll do is we'll step back a little bit in time. So maybe before we start talking about digital, maybe set the scene. Tell us a little bit around yourself, where you grew up and where you went to school and where you worked prior to joining digital. And my understanding is you joined digital in 1973.
That's correct, Kevin. And just to go backwards, I was born in County Antrim in 1942, 15th of March 1942, long time ago. My mother and father were both from County Monaghan. And my father served an apprenticeship in Rossmore, Castleaway those years ago as a gardener. And in the 1930s, he got the opportunity to move north to a Quaker family called the Greaves, and they had a lot of linen mills around the general Belfast area, and they lived about 15 miles out of Belfast. And so my dad moved up there. He got a house on the property. And he managed maybe 3 or 4 other gardeners, and they provided the food to the big house, as they called it at that time. So I was born there. I was born in the house, actually. And I went to primary school then about 3 miles away in a little place called Hannistown up in the hill. And then after primary school, I went to the Christian Brothers in Belfast. So I was there until I was just over 16. And at that stage, we couldn't afford a third level education, but the next best education was to go into a company that offered what we called at the time a sandwich course. And I was able to go to Pi Telecommunications in Larne. It was away from home, but I was offered a position there, and it was half-time at college and half-time in a work environment. So they produced RFI equipment and also televisions. And I was served my time then, quote, as an electronics technician. After about 3 years, then I moved back to near Belfast, back near my home. And I got employment with Grundig Corporation, German again in the electronics space. And I was with Grundig for 6 years, during which time I completed my HND in electronics. And then I moved into a supervisory position. And that was, it was really a volume manufacturing assembly type operation, but it was sort of day to day, minute by minute. Well, it was minute by minute, hour by hour production. And so a full workforce is critical. And it was basically me making sure that the work was done. Then an opportunity came up in the Ford Motor Company. It was a significant opportunity because the Ford Motor Company at the time were offering management positions, and they had a very good training and a remuneration background and package. So I joined Ford Motor Company for 6 years. I joined as a production manager, and then I moved into quality assurance management, working for the plant manager. And then the last year I was with Ford Motor Company. I was there for 6 years. The last year I was on a management training program in the UK. It was a 12-month training program. There were people selected from various operations. And the intent was to put you through this, a very significant program full-time, and then to be placed in one of their major facilities. At the time, Ford had about 10 locations in the UK. And so I knew that was my sort of designation, if you like, and destination. I wanted to get out of the north at the time because the troubles were very, very, very significant. And this move to the UK was sort of my first, at that stage, only choice. And then something happened in early 1973, and this was almost about 2/3 of the way through the management program, and that was that the Irish press were advertising for computer positions in Galway, management positions. And I had a very good friend in Buchan, and that was a business consultant, and probably wasn't ethical at the time often, but he had knew about the computer industry, had recognized digital as an up and coming company. And I shared with him, this opportunity and that I was going to apply. And he supported, if you like, their future and the potential. So I went to Galway, interviewed in, I think it was around March time of 1973. John Cropper interviewed me, Mike McQueen. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call back at Easter time to come back again. I went back, met John Cropper again and Mike. And the next thing, they offered me a job. And I got a letter then just after Easter from Ronnie Gilfillan, we all remember Ronnie, with an offer to join the company as they called it a business manager. And the pricely sum of 4,000 a year. So I signed up.
Fantastic. So, and did your family remain behind, Charlie, just in Belfast?
No, they didn't. My youngest girl at the time was 3, Donna, and Vera was pregnant with her second child at the time. So, no, we moved hook, line, and sinker to Galway to, I never forget it, the Coral Great Southern Hotel. And on the same day that we arrived, Mike Lynch and Brian Tonge arrived the same day, and we've been friendly with them ever since.
Ever since, my God, yeah. And that was 1973, so there was maybe 300-400 people in Ballybrit at the time?
It was about 300, and they were just moving into Ballybrit from the Merview operation, and I was hired at the time to head up the peripheral business.
Okay. And
you may recall, actually, the incumbent at the time was a fellow called Tony Corsiari.
Yes.
Tony was only there in Ireland for about 18 months, and he was going back to the States. I think he had some family issues back in the States, and so I got into his shoes, and the week after I took over, he brought me to the States, and his family were from New York. He ended up in the middle of New York, which is an experience for me. And then we went on to the Westfield operation, which was the peripheral business unit in the States, and I met all the players there. And I continued, obviously, a very good relationship with Westfield.
That was a great start at the time. And of course, there was literally, I also joined in 1973, and there was literally hundreds of people joining every year around the time. So I guess you experienced instant growth in
That's right.
In the facility.
Unbelievable. And I suppose the first impressions I had when I went into digital, it was obviously the opportunities and so on in terms of growth projections, but I couldn't get over the fact that in the first day there, it was all first name terms, right? And I had come from a background in Pi Telecommunications. It was very much Mr. In the German company, it was very much Mr. again. And the Ford Motor Company was less so, but it was a British subsidiary. So I was used to that type of sort of formality.
Yes.
And when I joined digital, I couldn't get over everybody was first names, and even it's Paul McGaughan. Who's he or what is he? Well, he's one of the major players out from the US, and so on. So that was a sort of an eye opener, a welcome relief.
We'll get to to talk about the digital culture after a while, but maybe tell us a little bit more around then the. You subsequently moved to Clonmel, but before that, were there other roles that you performed in the Ballybrit facility?
Yes, when I joined as the peripheral business manager, that was the production of discs and printers and videos and so on. And it was like a business unit with support, engineering, quality, and so on, that kind of post-production, of course. And I was only managing the peripheral business for about 15 months. And a fellow called Bill Valancourt, an American, he was the engineering manager working for John Cropper directly. He decided to go back to the States, so that there was a promotional opportunity, and I was offered that. Now, I was astounded because that was a way, beyond what my expectations were. So anyway, I took the job, and obviously I was working then directly for the plant manager. John Cropper was initially a plant manager, my boss, and then Bud Dill replaced John, right? And Bud, and I worked for Bud directly. Working for me at the time was quite interesting because I had four key people. Mike Donna, you may remember, Mike headed up quality. John Ayers headed up engineering. Robbie Burns headed up facilities. And the fourth person headed up quality control was Eddie O'Connell.
My God. Okay.
So we had those four people. So I was, in 1998 then, Clonmel was announced. I was asked to go there as operations manager by Pat Sweeney. And I put together my team, right? And the team I put together, I think, was very significant. We had Eddie O'Shea, quality. You had Ollie Butler, who headed up production. Jim O'Hara, who headed up materials. And Eugene McCabe, who headed up engineering. Right? And when you think about those names, I mean, they were young, enthusiastic, ready to tear down the walls types of persons. Yeah. So we had a fantastic team.
And all went on to bigger and better things subsequently.
Absolutely.
But, so Clonmel then offered, they're part of a startup. It's a different challenge from what you've experienced in Galway up to date. And indeed, probably a different challenge from what you'd experienced with Ford, because startups, there's nothing there. You have to create everything almost. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. My memory, the two sort of critical activities at the time, believe it or not, one was community. Settling the team into the community was crucial, right? So getting to know all the players, because we were a relatively big name, if you like, and into a relatively small community. So the management of that was absolutely critical. And as sort of Pat Sweeney really never relocated to Clonmel. I did, obviously, and therefore that responsibility was on my doorstep. So I worked quite hard at that particular aspect of the relocation. And then in terms of the startup itself, the recruitment was absolutely crucial, right? And we had Bill Dudgeon, you may recall Bill. Bill was our HR manager, and Bill did a super job, and he immediately integrated with the community, and he got to know the key players. And we never had one day of a difficulty with the people that we hired. And in a startup situation, that's absolutely crucial, really, to make sure that the culture that is a digital culture was maintained and developed. That was crucial. And I suppose the other aspect of a startup, right, was to convince the corporation, right, that we were an entity, that we weren't just an adjunct to Galway, if you like. So working the image and working the corporate sort of interaction was sort of crucial as well. And last but not least then was the new facility itself. And in the middle of all that, we were planning the 150,000 square feet out the Cashel Road, and all that entailed, working with corporate facilities and so all the local, if you like, government bodies, So those are the challenges. But I suppose, Kevin, I was youngish then, and up for these challenges. I had a young, dynamic team, and they would at anything, right, just to get the job done. And then all of a sudden, right, in 1990, I was whisked back to Galway. And that was a surprise, to tell you the truth.
And did you come back to Galway as the plant manager?
I did, yeah. And I think it was, I have to say that I think I was certainly ahead of my time, because it was a huge challenge, going back to Galway. I mean, it was a significant challenge because I had really relatively little experience of that size. I was quite versed in the digital culture at that stage because I was working in the Ballybrid facility. And what stood to me, and I think about it, was the fact that I had a very good knowledge of all the employees in Ballybrid. I had been there and I'd only been away for 18 months or so. Yeah. And secondly, the management team that were there, with the exception of maybe one person, I had already interacted with them as my peers, right? So that was the easy part. The more difficult part was when I went back to Galway, there was a sense of Galway were feeling insecure. They lacked sort of consistency over time because they had 2 or 3 plant managers in a row. And when Bud went back to the States and Paddy went in there, Paddy was only in the job for about 18 months or so. And then it went for about 6 months without a plant manager. So people were feeling a bit down and morale was low, right? So they were looking for better communication, stability, and a future, right? I mean, that this was going to be a stable entity. So I think I brought that over the next 5 years. As you well know, right, I always insisted in walking the floor. I walked the floor every day. I spent an hour on the floor every day. And I got to a point where I could honestly say I felt the mood of the plant. I felt the mood of the employees. I could sort of sense and smell what was going on. Right? If there was something not right or something wrong or somebody needed to talk to me, I was accessible. And I think that was one of the big positives of digital accessibility, was absolutely crucial. I made sure that physically I was accessible every single day. So that was my approach to the digital plant. The other positive was that when I was engineering manager, one of the key requirements was to interact with the corporate groups. You had to get capital equipment, significant amounts of capital equipment approved. And I was sort of at the front of that. So I had to go to the US, make presentations corporately. And that stood to me in great stead when I took over the operation there, because all the corporate linkages, I worked them inside out and got us exposed again, and got our profile lifted, if you like. So we're seen as a good entity.
You left Clonmel to come back to Galway. Clonmel was maybe 200-300 people at the time?
No, just about 200 people.
200. So you came back into Ballybrid, and Ballybrid was in excess of 1,000?
That's right, yeah.
That was a huge step up, Charlie.
Oh, it was, yeah. And as I say, it was a huge responsibility. Yeah. And the only thing that saved me, I think, was that I was always, I always felt that I could interact well with people. Yeah. And so therefore, knowing the people, they gave me a sort of a free pass, if you like, for a period of time until I got established and was able to, to have credibility with them, establish credibility and trust. And I think I did that in a relatively short period of time. And then from that perspective, it was relatively easy forward. But the most difficult issue was to reestablish the Galway operation as a key player in the corporate eyes. Yeah. And that was through performance and so on. And I think everybody bellied up then, and very clear communication, very clear goals and objectives, and it worked.
We touched a little bit earlier on culture and in fact what you've just talked about in terms of walking a plant and all that very much epitomizes the culture of the company. But now you're in a position where you joined in 1973 to experience this uniqueness of culture, as you said, informality versus formality of Ford. And now you're in a position of senior leadership, charged with responsibility to nurture and develop that culture. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't mention earlier, when I thought back about this interview, the most significant thing that I experienced in digital, right, was the performance appraisal process. And I didn't even anticipate this, right? But the fact that one had to sit down with an individual, with your colleague, with your work colleague, and look them straight in the eye and tell them how they're doing, how they're performing, what their career possibilities are, the issues that they have to work on, express empathy with them, get their understanding, not just in a work environment, also personally, where a lot of the issues were of a personal nature, but to build up that empathy and trust where you could be honest with them and they with you. Right? And to me, that was the most significant thing in digital, right? Was that whole process. And it extended beyond the formal presentation, formal performance process. It extended into just personal meetings, personal relationships, somebody knocking on the door and saying, listen, can I talk to you for a moment, right? And 9 times out of 10, right, it was they were looking some guidance and counseling and direction. And I think that would be an area that I really pushed most of all, was to adhere to the general principles of the performance process, because it forced some of the managers are reluctant, some of the supervisors are reluctant, right, to meet their deadlines. And I always sort of emphasize that was crucially important. Some of them, by the way, were afraid just for the confrontation issue. And sometimes it was confrontation, but it forced you into being honest with the person. So it created an ethic within the company that I have never seen again.
The open door policy, and there was obviously tremendous positivity in that, but as a plant manager with a responsibility for in excess of 1,000 people, the danger is if you have too much of an open door, you can get overwhelmed by it. So did that ever cross your mind?
Oh, it did, yeah. But I had a minder. I had Jane Regan. Jane was excellent. She was very astute, and she could help me to sort of make sure that these lads are just a bother, but these people are genuine. So she provided a filter to me, you know. But then again, I could read that anyway. Over time, you can read those people that really need help and support, and those that are talkers.
yeah, of course. Then, Charlie, you did something in 1987 that very few people did. You made a decision to leave digital. My recollection of the time was nobody left digital, and you made a decision in 1987. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it was interesting. At the time, for about the previous year, maybe 2 years, I was under a constant sort of pressure from Henry Krauss. Henry Krauss was my vice president of operations in Europe. And Henry kept on telling me that it was time for me to move. Right? You can come to the States, right? You can go up the ladder. There's lots of promotional opportunities. Alternatively, you can come to Geneva, right, and be part of the European group. And I kept on sort of fobbing it off a bit. I really didn't want to leave Galway. I was very happy and comfortable. And my family at the time, Donna was at this stage 15, 12, and 9. And Henry then came up with this great plan, right? He said, I'd like to go in this management development program in the US at the Darden Business School. And it was a fantastic experience in the University of Virginia. And it's a well-known business school. And once a year, they have people come from all walks of life in the US, industry, finance, banking, and so on, the military, and so on. So they all congregate at the Darden Business School for 12 weeks. And it's just intensive training, all facets of management and so on. And the family went with me, and we stayed on the campus there, beautiful apartment and so on. And it was a fantastic learning experience. And the objective, you see, was to basically immerse me in the US culture, if you like. But at the end of that 3-month period, I concluded that this isn't for us. It isn't for our family. It isn't for me, right? So I don't want to bring up my kids at their ages in this environment. So I made a decision that, no, we're not going to the US. Coincidentally, at the same time, I was approached by Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, the precursor to Intel.
Yeah.
And I interviewed with them and they offered me the job. And they offered me buy the land, build the factory, hire the people. And so it was a fantastic project. And I basically took the opportunity to do that. It meant that I would stay in Ireland. Greystones was the location. And I was happy out then from the family perspective. I'm very, very sad to leave digital, very, very sad to leave the
So I was going to ask you, and you've just answered it there. I was going to ask you, like some of your contemporaries, you know, Paddy Sweeney, the late Kevin Melia, and others. Obviously, when Frank McCabe, obviously went to the US and went on to very, very senior roles. And I was wondering, was that an option that you explored? But you've just answered that, and that obviously, you know, these decisions are a combination of what's right for your career, but more importantly, what's right for the family.
That's true, Kevin. And I have to say that I never regretted for one moment making that decision. What I did regret was having to leave digital and leave the most enjoyable experience and learning experience behind. Ironically, my eldest girl, Donna, she did her BCom here and then did her master's in business studies. She ended up going to the States. She ended up joining Oracle on the West Coast. She now lives in New Jersey with her Dublin-born husband. And she's been in the States for 20 years now. And she got a very good job and so on. But as people will question me, I say, well, after all, right, Donna ended up and says, I say, yeah, but that was her decision, not mine.
You know, just go back to 1971 and subsequently 73, it wouldn't really have changed that much. The population of Galway at the time was 27,000. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about the size of Ennis or Athlone today. So Galway was a small place.
That's right, yeah.
Up over the next up to 94, 23 years, the population of the city had more than doubled, and of course it has continued to grow. In your view, was the presence of companies like digital, and of course digital was the biggest by a distance at the time, did that have a profound impact on the subsequent growth of the city?
There's no doubt about that. And let me try and recall at the time, when I came to Galway in 73, there were two other major industries, Thermo King and Northern Telecom. Now, they were the only two others, and then there's a slew of small businesses, local businesses. Digital grew dramatically, very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, the IDA started, I mean, they had, when I was running the plant, I would get visits, Jesus, 2 or 3 times a week sometimes, you know. And I recall meeting the likes of Apollo and Apple, by the way, on their visits to Galway, right? But Galway, digital was growing dramatically. And we did 2 things in digital, I think, that had a strong influence in the future. And that was the integration and liaison with the universities and the technical colleges. That was one critical initiative. And I think the late Colin Mahoka and Tom Hyland, they were sort of instrumental at the start to get that off the ground. And also, I recall a young engineer called Jimmy Brown actually participating in some of those early programs, you know. So to me, reaching out to the universities and so on and creating somewhat of an integrated infrastructure, and that was new and different at the time. That wasn't done anywhere else in Ireland, by the way. The universities stuck to themselves, industry stuck to themselves. So all of a sudden you had this integration and collaboration, which was very, very positive. The second thing that I think helped dramatically was communications. Telecommunications, when we were in Galway, were awful. At the start of digital in Galway, it was just terrible, right? And then the country decided to go digital, and they invested quite significant. The country did, right? They skipped over the like a technology space, and all of a sudden, right, we had very good communication infrastructure in Galway, and that in itself also helped. Right? So we had these visits from various the IDA just started loading visits into the Galway area. We sold them, I think, on behalf of the nation, a lot of positives. Young workforce, smart, integrated with the universities, good telecommunications now, and a great living environment, right? And all of a sudden, these new industries started to spring up, and then the whole medical device sector, as you know, Kevin, started to invest. I remember Bernard actually, and he had sharing an office right at the start, and Boston Scientific started off in the Wilson building, that little building up in Ballybrid. And from there, I mean, Boston Scientific was a major grower. And
in your view, Charlie, would you say that digital, if you look at the IT sector today,
yeah.
I only discovered the other day that SAP have 800 people employed in Galway.
That's right, yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. So, and that's, the IT industry in Ireland is so strong. Would you say companies like digital spawned that capability, that infrastructure that has led to the success of the IT business in Ireland today?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that as well, because all you have to do is to look at the players in those companies. Look at the player. I know fellas in SAP. My son-in-law works there, right? Okay, got a digital influence in there. You've got, for example, you've got our friends in Hewlett Packard who survived from the ashes and now a hugely successful company. And these successes, and then you've got a slew of other small businesses around that we sort of lose track of, but little pockets, if you like, of IT activity, all feeding off, I think, right, the digital success. And the fact, I think that the lads in software did a superb job at keeping that activity alive, and they're due a lot of support and a lot of praise for what they did, because from them spawned all these other little software companies.
Of course, and I think there's 3 different HP entities in Galway in their state-of-the-art office building there in Ballybrid. Right. I think there's upwards of 1,000 people employed there. So a lot of people say when digital moved out of Galway in 1994, we should remind ourselves that the software business stayed, subsequently taken over by Compaq and then by HP, and has flourished and grown.
That's right. That's true. Yeah.
So just to go back to you talked around the relationship with the universities and how that developed and influenced. I suppose now universities are very tightly knit with industry. We have a whole range of degree programs, master's programs, postgraduates, and digital certainly influenced that relationship. But also it did something else. It put an incredible effort into developing its own people from within.
Yeah, absolutely true. And again, I keep harping back to this performance appraisal process. And it almost all started there, when you're sitting high with someone and they're talking about their future and what they would like to do and the possibilities. And we were somewhat limited ultimately in terms of what you could offer someone, right? But what you could offer them is education, right? And slowly but surely, we started introducing university type programs.
Yes.
And that allowed people to, 2 things, it allowed them to obviously to progress their educational profile, but also to go out into that world and interact with other people. And to me, that was obviously crucial. And I was laughing yesterday when I looked at this thing about these eagles coming into Ireland. That reminded me somewhat, right, of digital and when the hardware business shut down, all of a sudden, these little eagles were scattered all over the place and they found opportunities and They were thrown out of their nest, but by God, they could salvage opportunities and progressed in a very significant way.
There's no doubt that the number of startups that occurred as a result of that decision in 1994, which obviously was and we'll come to that in a minute, was a very tough decision for the 800 people who were impacted by it. But coming out of it was the beginning of a new era that's gone from strength to strength.
Absolutely. And I recall at the time, I was asked to go in and meet with some of the people, and sort of I had moved on and I was in a consultancy mode. And I remember talking with Brian Long, would you believe that? And he went on to do super things, right? And then a whole slew of other small businesses. And we set up the technology advice group down in Merview, and little incubation units. And I was on the board of that company along with Joe Higgins. Joe was the chairman. Yes. And again, lots of digital people went through that process. Right? And today, I think there's something like 40 or 50 incubation units operating down there. So yeah, people needed a little hand to get out there. Others didn't. Others were, as I say, like Brian Long, they were ready to go. They had a huge experience working in digital. The only piece that probably a lot of us were missing in digital was the market experience, right? The selling, marketing side of the activity. Everything else we understood and were well educated, if you like, in business generally, but that particular aspect we had to learn about. By the way, the company also at the time had to learn a fair bit about marketing and selling. But anyway, they survived that challenge. And
you referenced earlier Boston Scientific, and of course I was part of that startup, and as were two other digital people. So, coming out of the computer industry and being part of the startup in medical devices, David Toohey as head of operations and subsequently became VP of operations running the plant, and Phil Watson as head of logistics, and myself as head of HR. So, that was just one example. There were many others of where digital people showed, because of the incredible experience and learning they got and development, that they went on to bigger and better things with totally diverse industries.
That's true. And I suppose the other two big names that I mentioned earlier, I think, was Jimmy O'Hara, who headed up the whole Intel activity in Europe, and Eugene McCabe, right, who became sort of operations director for Sun Microsystems, right, corporately. I mean, they were massive tasks, massive jobs. And yourself, Kevin, you scaled the heights in Boston Scientific from the startup situation right through. So lads like yourself, and then I'd like to also mention that digital, I know a lot of the people were sort of thrown out into finding their own space and finding their own opportunities, right? But think about the numbers of people, right, that have followed the same template, if you like, from the medical device sector, where people have basically left that sector and have done their own thing, new products, new ideas, innovation. I mean, it's amazing. And I think you could trace it right back to that digital, as I say, the exodus, if you like, of digital at the time.
When in 1994, when the facility hardware finally closed, announced in 1992, obviously a lot of local commentators and politicians felt it was the beginning of the end of Galway, and
that's right.
In fact, the exact opposite has happened. Galway has gone. Digital was the only employer at that time with employing in excess of 1,000 people between.
That's right.
And now I think there are 6 different companies in Galway. I mean, Medtronic, which of course started from Bard in Galway more than 40 years ago. Medtronic is 3,500 people. Boston Scientific have in excess of 4,000 people. Merit Medical, 1,500. You can go on and on and on. So Galway has just gone from strength to strength.
That's true. And the positive side too is that if you think about digital, when digital started, it was basically a product assembly operation. module assembly and so on right out.
Yeah.
Then developed some technical support level stuff in FNT and in the test business, right? And then Eddie's contribution then in setting up an R&D activity in Galway digital was, again, basically ahead of his time in terms of its thinking, you know. And then we move out along over time, and you have a look at what's happening in the likes of Boston Scientific or Medtronic, or any of the software activities, including Hewlett Packard. They're all involved in higher level work, higher level activity in research and development, in massive global product support. And so it's a testimony of you like of the various people that have been involved in industry in Galway that have sort of matured the activity over time and made it unique and to some degree competitive, mostly competitive now with the global world, you know. And as time goes on, I think that's going to be a major issue, because the world is not a stable world. The fact that Apple are back looking at Athenry, right, to build their facility, right, that to me, they're looking at it from not just from a financial perspective, but also from a security perspective. So I think security is going to become a major issue, and we're sitting pretty. And also, I think the fact that we've got excellent systems now for people from primary level right through secondary level, right through university and so on, right? And there's so much research and development going on, product development going on. I think we're in a good place, you know.
I certainly agree with you. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago, digital was unique by having an R&D facility.
Yeah.
Now, you look at the number of startups, and most of those startups, whether it's in the IT sector or medical devices or others, have spawned out of people working in R&D in heavy engineering capability, and subsequently deciding to do their own startup and grow their own.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. It's true. Yeah.
So Charlie, you after leaving in 1987, obviously subsequently the AMD didn't take off.
Yeah.
And you then went working for yourself and became a very successful businessman, and then retired a number of years ago.
Yeah, I retired not a number of years ago. I retired 18 months ago.
18 months ago, my God.
18 months ago. Yeah, I ended my business career with Origin. I was on the board of Origin for just over 20 years, right? And there's another very good example, entrepreneurial example, John Parr. John is a young engineer, come back to Ireland. He's born of Irish parents in London. His parents moved back to Moycullen. John came back. John was, I think, 26 years old when he came back, and he worked with Nelcor, Puritan Bennett, but was always entrepreneurial. Came to me one day and said he had this opportunity to license the technology from the States, and happened to be the Origin technology, and he could convert it into a nebulizer that could be used in hospital ventilators, and that's how it started off. And John jumped ship from Nelcor, Puritan Bennett with a contract to replace the Siemens nebulizer with this new technology nebulizer, and he never looked back since. Early on, Origin Corporation owned John, if you like, but then they were sold off, and John took the opportunity to buy it out, well, along with Bernard, actually, myself. And but John's the brains, John was the man, and it's been hugely successful. And I see traits in John that I think are the best traits that I've experienced in digital: honesty and integrity, trustworthy. I mean, it's just a good person, right? Who's been very successful. It's just, he's been successful because I think he has practiced in the right way, you know?
So Charlie, you came to Galway in 1973.
Yeah.
Despite various flirtations with either study or temporary assignments elsewhere, you've remained resident in Galway ever since. I mean, that's what, 40 something years now?
No, 40 odd years, 45
years.
years.
Yeah. So, you know, digital definitely not alone was a major influence on your career, but subsequently became a major influence on your life.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I mean, the experience in digital, right, has made me a better person, right? There's no question about that, right? The sort of the philosophy, right, of honesty and integrity, and we always call say do the right thing. But do the right thing, I used to think is a bit of a cliche, but when I thought about it, it meant that with your colleagues you did the right thing, right? You were honest with them. With clients or with customers, you did the right thing, right? Honesty and integrity. And I was tested in that one a few times with contractors, right? With the community, you did the right thing, right? And you know, contributing to the community and doing the right thing by trying to bring in more industry and more activity into the country. That was doing the right thing. So I've learned that. I learned that in digital. I took that on board and I've practiced it from digital for the rest of my life, and hopefully continue to do that.
Well, the people in Galway that had the pleasure of working with you from and Clonmel from 73 to 87 would always fondly remember and say great things about Charlie Mulligan and you as a leader and the impact that you had on their careers and subsequently on their lives. You know, so thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, Charlie, and continued success and health and good health going forward.
I really enjoyed it, Kevin, and particularly interacting with yourself. I think we've known each other for a long, long time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And hopefully for many more years.
With the help of God. Thank you. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Kevin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.